All right, good afternoon. This is group five, including Caitlin Long, Jayana Humphrey, Tawan Pulliam, and myself, Aaliyah Miller. This is chapter nine. Record keeping is more than paperwork. So this chapter goes over four learning targets. Number one, separate formative from summative assessment information. So this discusses why everything students do counts for learning. Number two, organize the entries in the gradebook according to Learning Represented, which talks about managing your gradebook effectively. Number three, track information about work habits and social skills separately from achievement information, which talks about defining effort and work habits in your classroom. And number four is record achievement information, so you can interpret it accurately, which discusses interpreting data in raw score form. So those are all of the learning targets, and now we're going to move into the objectives more in detail.
All right, so I had learning target one. Of course, I can distinguish between formative and summative. Summative assessment information to analyze how each type is used to support student learning, guide instruction, and determine accurate grades. Formative assessments are used during the learning process to monitor student understanding, provide feedback, and guide instructional decisions. These may include classwork discussions, practice assignments, and informal checks for understanding. Their primary purpose is to support learning and improvement rather than assign a final grade. Summative assessments, on the other hand, occur at the end of a learning period and are used to evaluate what students have mastered. These include tests, projects, and final exams that provide evidence of achievement and are typically used for grading. Understanding the distinction between these two types of assessments ensures that grades reflect true learning rather than practice or effort. Separating formative and summative data allows teachers to provide meaningful feedback, adjust instruction, and communicate student progress more accurately.
Okay, so objective number two is organize entries in a gradebook according to the learning represented. This is all about labeling the categories you establish for your records. Many schools have standard-based grade reports, meaning you're reporting student achievement according to your district's content standard. Most schools have computer systems to manage grades. In my district specifically, we use Infinite Campus, which has a lot of features in it. Grade reports are generated by the data that you enter. It's your decision on how much detail you put into your records. In this section of the textbook, there's an example where a teacher changed their mind frame as it pertains to grading. They empathize to their students and to parents that everything does not need a letter grade. They also changed their unit tracking sheet, now allowing for students to refer to it every day. This teacher also changed their approach to summative exams and created a formative testing day. This teacher noticed students were much more engaged and actually enjoyed showing their work to the teacher. Students now understood that incomplete work meant no grade in this teacher's class.
I think does everyone use Infinite Campus now?
My
Yes, we used
school
to
just
use
switched.
Just
Power
switch.
School.
Hmm.
It's I don't know how it is in y'all's district. It could just be user error. It has really been a mess for us. But we switched to it last year, so this is our second year with it. But we've had to start keeping like other grade books too because it's like not calculating total grades correctly. Like we use Canvas for our platform instead of Google Classroom, and it sometimes doesn't pull correctly. So it's been a big challenge from Power School to Infinite Campus for sure.
I can
Yeah, that's
say the same. Let's see. This is our what's this 2025 2026 school year. So this was our first year using it, and then like you said, like having the work from Canvas trying to like sync over. Um, it doesn't really reflect like it almost reflects like two different grades. So I find myself going back and doing like a lot of adjustments to make sure it's actually accurate, especially in Infinite Campus. But no, it is quite difficult, and even down to like, I don't know, when we get like new kids and stuff like that, they're in the system, but they don't necessarily show in the system, if that makes sense. But I
Yeah.
can definitely attest to like it has its issues and challenges for sure.
Mhm.
To piggyback off of what y'all said, I know at the beginning of the year when we first switched over, it was a hot mess, especially with like the kids in the kindergarten enrollment. I know for kindergarten, it was all over the place. Numbers weren't inputting, students weren't inputting. We was doing like paper attendance for the first 2 months of school. And even now, kids, we have to send constant emails for kids to be updated as we get new students.
Wow.
Yeah, I have to do paper attendance. I've been 2 years in, I'm still doing paper attendance because mine, which is partially because our school, like, schedule is so different because we're on an A day, B day schedule. So I only see the kids twice a week. Um, but I had a kid missing 30 some classes last semester, which is like 15 weeks of school. And she wasn't showing up on the like attendance, um, like high alert for attendance because it was counting it just as a period instead of the whole day, even though that was what she had for the day because the rest were college classes. So like I just keep paper attendance because can't I don't know when I look at the thing if it's right or not.
So I had objective three, track information about work habits and social skills separately from achievement information. So student behaviors and dispositions such as class participation, academic honesty, timeliness of work turned in, attendance, cooperation, and attitude all contribute to success at learning. So as a teacher, part of our job is to help students develop productive behaviors and dispositions towards learning and teach our students how to be successful learners. So for me, in pre-K, tracking work habits and social skills separately from achievement is a big part of what we do and how we assess our students. For example, I have one student in my class. He's very smart, but he lacks motivation to do things. When it's time to work, he doesn't want to work. He just sits there or whines and be stubborn. But he knows the content. But on the other hand, I have another student who thrives in social skills and work habits, but is academically behind. And this is an example of how tracking our work and habits and social skills in our classroom work so that we're able to keep up with this data and track it. And so moving on, if the behavior and dispositions we select to track and report are a broad, such as effort or work habits, we will need to define the actions that underpin them. For example, is effort signified by work turned in on time, doing extra work, something else, it's recommended that we select and define important work habits and social skills. After clarifying the underlying actions for each behavior expectation, we need to identify how we will assess each one. All students should understand the behavior and actions they are expected to learn and have opportunities to improve prior to being held accountable for mastering them. Once it is known how we will assess, a tracking system should be established, keeping in mind the intended use for it. For example, if some of your students struggle with different work habits, you can analyze your records to identify trends and devise solutions with students and or parents. In past practice, it has been common for teachers, principals, or even districts to select behaviors and dispositions that matter most to them and then either assign them a percentage of the summative grade or simply award or deduct points for this presence or absence. I know that's used a lot in the school district I work in. If a student misses a certain amount of days, it then begins to start impacting their grade. So using this practice is harmful to learning because it destroys the accuracy of the grades as an indicator of achievement level, leaving serious impact on students. So moving into late or missing work, Lowering a grade does nothing to change the behavior of students who have adopted an indifferent stance to poor grades, and it does not address the underlying problem. There can be many reasons why the student is not completing their work, and it is important to discover those reasons. For example, it could be maybe there's changes going on at home and they're just not focused, or they just don't understand it. And again, lack of motivation could all go into effect. And then lastly, going into extra credit. So, extra credit has often been awarded as a way for students to raise their grade. Yet, when students are awarded simply points for completing the work or for unrelated acts, it can compromise the grade. For the grade to be an accurate representation of the student's current level of achievement, the extra credit work must be a reflection of what is being taught and if the learning target is represented. So if extra credit is going to be offered, make sure that it is related to the current content students are learning in the classroom.
Yeah, I thought that was really good, and it gives me a lot to think about too because my class and I think y'all's classes too are kind of sometimes more life skills. It's hard for me to like not grade them on that necessarily those behaviors because I feel like that is part of the like main things that I'm teaching them. But to think about it with like, does this accurately reflect their learning is a good way to like make sure that everything is aligned like with the learning targets. And maybe those learning targets are those life skills, but making sure that it goes back to that and it accurately reflects like what their knowledge base is.
To start with reflection, question one.
I think I have sorry, I have one more.
Oh,
I
sorry, sorry.
no, you said, I was like, wait a minute, it's me. So objective 4 is record achievement information so that you can interpret it accurately. And then later on, it talked about recording information by raw score when possible. And so basically, that talks about like recording it not as a percentage or a letter grade, but by the actual score. So, for example, they gave two examples of 2 out of 3 answers correct and 12 out of 18, which both ended up being like a percentage score of 67% or a letter grade of D. But if you look at student learning, because the sample size was larger, you can see more that like this student probably did learn more who mastered 12 out of the 18 questions because they knew 12 questions of the content, whereas the other student, since you only asked 3 questions, they may have known more, but they were only able to show that they learned 2 of those things. And so it provides like more accurate data for you as a teacher that you know what they learned. So I thought that was a good reminder when it comes to sample size, to make sure that like the picture is big enough that you can like for one have a good amount of things that they can show you that they master and good opportunities to do so. But for two to record it in that way, which I don't do, so I'm, this is something new to me. Um because then you know exactly what questions they got correct, which learning targets they mastered versus just having a 67 or a D when that really doesn't show you which ones were mastered. So I thought that was interesting.
Interesting. So I have reflective question one. Of course, after reading chapter nine, my understanding of grading and record keeping has both been reinforced and challenged. Previously, I believed that most assignments should be graded to ensure accountability of student effort. However, this chapter clarified that not all work should contribute to a final grade, especially formative assessments, which are designed to support learning through practice and feedback rather than evaluation. This chapter also shifted my thinking about separating academic achievement from work habits. I now recognize that including behaviors such as participation, effort, or timeliness in academic grades can distort a student's true level of mastery. Keeping these areas separate provides a more accurate and ethical representation of what students actually know and can do. Overall, this chapter emphasized that grading should be intentional, organized, and aligned with the learning targets. Record keeping is not just about storing information, but it's more about using that information to improve instruction and clearly communicate student progress. And just to speak on like the attendance and stuff like that, because that is like a big issue, like just across the board. I have had and have met students, current and in the past, where they would miss like 30 days of school, right? But then I'll be thinking in my head, like, okay, so like, does the child go here? Do they not go here? Do they move? Like, what's going on? Then when you find out all of the like logistics and stuff behind the scenes, it's like, oh, but then when you see them, they are motivated, they are working and stuff like that. But then it's just like, okay, well, you did extra great on this, but then now I still kind of have to like play catch up with you. So I do a thing where, especially if they're new kids, like if I'm on a certain area, I will excuse them from getting a grade because they wouldn't necessarily know the current content area that I'm currently teaching on, but you can fill in and then we're gonna catch you up. So then that way your grade does not fall behind. But that is a very big issue. And it could be home situation, it could be just more so focus or behavior contribution to it. And also who they are also around. Because you have some kids who work very well when they're by themselves, and then you have students who may not work so well depending on who they're around or influenced by. So that was good.
Yeah, I think that's good. And there's always those kids too. Like I have one in particular in my mind right now who like miss the 30 days, but they're
Mm-hmm.
good test takers, they're smart, and so
Mm-hmm.
their knowledge is there. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's hard as a teacher to grade them just on the knowledge when you want to hold
Mm-hmm.
them accountable. And so I think trying to find ways to hold them accountable that
Mm-hmm.
maybe isn't their grade
Mm-hmm.
is like what to, what I guess we in education as a whole need to pursue a good way to do that because I don't really know if there is a good way to do that honestly,
Mm-hmm.
except for just trying to build relationships and hold them
Mm-hmm.
accountable that way.
Mm-hmm.
But because I think eventually it does catch up to them at some point, and it could be not till they're in college or whatever. At some point,
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna run out of their knowledge, and it's gonna be
Mm-hmm.
hard for them if they don't have those other skills to
Mm-hmm.
back it up. They're not gonna do well, and it's gonna crash and burn. And so
Correct.
that's what I struggle with too.
Anybody else like struggles with that at their school? I know, like, speaking on my behalf, this is we since I started teaching at the school that I'm at. This is actually like the first school year where attendance has been like at its low. It usually is at a super high, and like we be getting like we're still even right now getting like new kids. So why would you do that in the middle of the school year? That's your business, but it does off throw the students, and then just taking in consideration like it's a new place, new students. They have to get familiar and build like relationships and stuff all over again. But a part of teaching that part about real life application and life skills is that you have to learn to adapt and adjust. Unfortunately, under the circumstances, but it teaches you to kind of like be prepared for what's unexpected.
I know at my school we've been having kind of similar problems. I know in my classroom for sure. There was one student we got him like right after we got back from Christmas break, but he just never showed up. And after like maybe like a month of trying to reach out to parents and see why isn't he showing up to school and what's up with the attendance, we found out that there's a transportation issue. So then it goes back to a lot of these problems is like falling on the student and their academic experience when it's the parents. A lot of it has to do with stuff they're going through, but we're seeing how
Mhm.
it's rippling down and affecting the students.
Mhm.
I know we're seeing
Mhm.
a lot of that at my school.
And you're like in the age group you have, are there resources in place for transportation, or is it solely dependent on the parent or guardians?
So it's parent or guardian, but some of these kids have older siblings at the schools. And so some of them can ride the buses, but they're not going to send one and not the other.
Mm. Okay.
I always say I used to have to do like tardies in the morning. Um, and I'm like, if these kids can't drive and don't have a car, if they're late, it's not really, I mean, it could be their fault because they could have delayed, but most of the
Mm-hmm.
time it's their parents' fault for not getting to school on time. So
Mm-hmm.
I always was like, well, I'm so glad you're here, all this stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you walk into school, I just feel like that's a hard thing to get like berated with, like, you're late again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I always thought, like, well, if at least they showed up, at least they
Mm-hmm.
came when I
Yeah.
was having to do that job. So,
Okay, so reflection number two is, how does this chapter align with your own beliefs about teaching and learning? As a teacher, I believe it's better to stay organized with your grading, but to also do what works best for you. Ethically acknowledging students' grades based on what was completed and what was not is important. I think as teachers, we have to address uncomfortable moments sometimes with students and parents, but honesty works best, and I think it's beneficial to have your documented evidence when occurrences arise. I believe that extra credit is a great tool that can be given to students. I remember as a K through 12 student, I appreciated when teachers gave out gave that out because it made me feel like they wanted me to succeed in school. As a teacher, I personally enjoy giving out extra credit. It always it always allows me to see students value their education at a young age.
I had critical reflection three. Which strategy or idea from this chapter would you feel most confident implementing and why? And I said data keeping and tracking as a whole. I feel most confident implementing it because it's a big part of what I do now and it just comes naturally at this point. And I know that sometimes it feels like this is a lot of data, what's it for? But once you really like get into the data, I feel like you see like it's towards this thing or this thing, but it all matters and it's all important, even though sometimes it can feel overwhelming or pointless. It just all matters completely.
yeah,
That's good.
I think that is good. I'm not as good with my data, and that's one of my goals for next year. Be better.
I would say that's something I'm getting better at. Um, Given that's what our focus has been for the school year. Tracking data, going over data with students and what that looks like. Just let alone like, helping them keep up with what their grades are. Because this time a year, especially in the second half of semester, is more hectic. There's a lot of schedule adjustments and changes. So instead of operating on a full 5-day work week, you have maybe like three, sometimes 2 days, like this week alone. So Monday was a normal day, Tuesday was a small group day, yesterday was a normal day. Today was interim testing. Then tomorrow's picture day, which for us, that's going to cut down, instead of us having, except for seventh grade, but for sixth and eighth grade, it'll cut down class time from being like 45 minutes to maybe roughly about 25 to 30 minutes, just because of the moving back and forth, waiting for everybody to get done with their pictures, all of that. And then, of course, we're also preparing for EOG. So then after spring break, that schedule is going to be even more crazier with, kids are getting pulled for tutoring and all of that stuff just in preparation for the EOGs. And then You have your testing days and small group days compiled on top of that. So you're probably, when we come back, we'll probably only have maybe like 2 or 1 day, if that, as like a normal constructional instructional day. So it's interesting. But again, this is just teaching y'all how to adjust and maneuver. Um, as life comes and goes, you still have to be like on top of your stuff. Cause just as quick as life comes, you can start slipping. You can start getting behind. You can get overwhelmed. You can get overly stimulated, as they like to say. So yeah, that is it's interesting.
Yeah. That is a lot when the schedule's all wonky like that. For students and for teachers too.
Uh-huh.
Because you still
Uh-huh.
got stuff you gotta do,
Yeah.
even though the
And then
schedule's
grading, like for us, like our grading day, like our grades have to be submitted every Tuesday. But then do most of us follow that? No. I try to get my grades done early, if anything. But like coming in on the teacher work days and doing grading, no, it's already submitted and done. Um,
that's
just
good.
because I need time to, what are we gonna do next? What's the next content area gonna be? Or if I want to actually do what's next and do something else and then go back to that, like it can be very chaotic.
Mhm. I get that. Okay, I had reflection question 4, which was what makes you nervous, uncertain, or hesitant about putting into practice? And for me, it's something I thought about before this school year, but I didn't really have time to fully kind of flesh it out because we had some PD on it at the beginning of the year. But the standard switching to standards-based grading instead of just a traditional grade book is something that makes me nervous just because I've seen it worked very successfully with 2 teachers that I really admire and, have helped me, but I know it's a kind of a lot more work on the teacher. It's better for students, but a lot more work on the teacher because you have to constantly like, there isn't late work, so you're constantly taking this stuff in, and you're constantly, giving them opportunities to show mastery in those standards. And so I think just kind of wrapping my head around how to do that, but also have it translate in Canvas and an infinite campus is where my like hesitancy lies. And so I'm hoping, because I do see the benefit of them being able to try an assignment basically as many times until they get mastery is important because we want them to ultimately master the content. Um, but I do think that the computer systems we have to use and we ultimately have to give them a grade, it makes that a little tricky. So that's something I'm excited about and interested in but nervous about. I know one of my friends who started it this year, this is his first year doing it. He has learning targets that are some of those behaviors, so it does kind of ultimately count, but it's one of those things where like, yes, there's no technical like, you're not getting late points for anything, but if you turn in these things late, you're not mastering that target of turning your stuff in on time. So that's how he's kind of combined those 2 things, so it's tracked differently in its own learning target.
Yeah. So I'm gonna close this out. Of course, in conclusion, I've learned that effective record keeping requires separating formative and summative assessments, organizing data by learning targets, tracking work habits independently, and recording scores in ways that maintain accuracy. These practices ensure that grades truly reflect student learning and can be used to guide both teaching and feedback. Moving forward for me, I am left with a few questions. So I wrote down 3 questions that I'm going to work out on how I'm going to answer them and apply them based on chapter 9. But the first question was that I wrote out was how can I effectively manage separating formative and summative data in a real classroom setting? What tools or systems such as Canvas or gradebook features can best support organizing by learning targets? And then how can I clearly communicate grading practices to students and parents so they understand the difference between learning and behavior? And this would be for my IEP students and 504 students. because I feel like there are more of those type of students than students who don't have those documentations. Um, I already kind of do stuff. I try not to do it like too modified, because if I do it too modified, then it's just gonna be like a cakewalk, and then that's gonna be it. So I try not to. I try to abide by what their documentations reference, but then I also try to go a little extra mile and push the documentation just a little bit. Not too much, but just a little bit. Because I feel like with those documentations, I feel like the students use them to their advantage, but a disadvantage in a sense. So they know that like there's certain stuff that they can get out of, which I feel like, for example, reading. Like if your documentation says your requirement for reading is 30 to 45 minutes, and I know for certain that you are not understanding the context or let alone doing the work, I try to figure out other strategies. Like I have some with the 504s and the IEPs who are not great at literally doing computer work at all. So they would prefer to do it on paper. And then I have some who are like the opposite of that. And then I have some who just don't have any type of like motivation and just see school as like, okay, like by the time I get to your class, like I'm already drained and I'm tired and I don't even feel like doing anything that you asking me. So I try to like push the bridges on that a little bit. But that's what I would be asking myself. And closing out chapter 9 and reading chapter 9 and really breaking down the full understanding between the difference of the two.